I checked the oxygen recycling gauges for the third time that hour, my fingers moving through the calibration sequence automatically after 6 months in the engineering bay. The Triton's life support systems were my responsibility, and I took that seriously. 3,000 feet below the surface, there was no margin for error. The pressure gauges needed a slight adjustment. I turned the manual valve until the needle settled precisely where it needed to be. The satisfying click of the mechanism locking into place never got old. "Come on, Cooper," I muttered to myself. "Finish up and you might actually eat dinner while it's still warm." Working in the engineering bay had become second nature. The constant hum of machinery, the slight metallic taste in the recycled air, the gentle vibration of the habitat, all of it felt normal now. I monitored the diagnostic readout on the central console, watching as the numbers stabilized exactly where they should be. 6 months underwater changes your perception of normal. What had once seemed claustrophobic now felt like home. The network of connected modules that made up the Triton housed our 5-person crew comfortably enough, though I wouldn't have minded a few more square feet in my personal quarters. I made a final notation in the systems log and headed toward the command center to give Mary my report. The narrow corridor connecting the engineering bay to the rest of the habitat was lined with exposed pipes and conduits. Not pretty, but functional, just the way I liked it. Mary was at her usual spot, reviewing data at the command console. Commander Thomas ran a tight ship, which I appreciated. Her blonde hair was pulled back in its usual no-nonsense ponytail, and she didn't look up immediately when I entered. "Systems check complete," I said, stopping at a respectful distance. "Oxygen recycling is running at 98% efficiency. We're well within optimal parameters." Mary looked up from her tablet, her blue eyes sharp and assessing. "Any issues I should know about?" "Nothing significant. Had to adjust pressure in the secondary coolant loop, but it's holding steady now." "Good work." She nodded, already turning back to her work. Mary wasn't one for unnecessary conversation. Another quality I respected. "Get some rest, Wong. You've been on shift for 10 hours. I checked my watch, surprised to find she was right. Time had a way of slipping by when I was focused on the systems. "Yes, ma'am. I'll be back on at 0600. As I left command, my stomach reminded me loudly that I'd missed lunch. The common area was just ahead, and the smell of tonight's dinner, something with tomatoes, pulled me forward. Sheila was already there, her medical uniform crisp despite the long day I knew she'd had. She looked up as I entered and pushed a tray toward the empty seat across from her. "Saved you a plate," she said. "Figured you'd forget to eat again." I sat down gratefully. "Thanks. Lost track of time." "You always do." She took a bite of her pasta. "How's our oxygen situation? Should I start holding my breath?" "Very funny. We're at 98% efficiency. We could stay down here another 6 months if we had to." Sheila raised an eyebrow. "Please don't give Mary any ideas. I miss the sun." I dug into my food, suddenly aware of how hungry I was. The pasta wasn't bad. Chef might be an overstatement for our food preparation system, but it did the job. Stephen rushed in, his eyes wide with excitement behind his rectangular glasses. He practically bounced into the chair next to Sheila, not even bothering to grab food first. "You won't believe what I just saw on the outer sensor grid," he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. Sheila exchanged a glance with me. Stephen's enthusiasm was a constant aboard the Triton, though the objects of his excitement changed regularly. "Let me guess," I said between bites. "Another new species of deep-sea cucumber." Stephen shook his head. "Much bigger. Something moved past the Western Quadrant sensors. Something large." "Define large," Sheila said. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Massive," Stephen insisted. "At least 20 feet long, maybe bigger." The movement pattern was unlike anything I've documented so far. Mary walked in just then, catching the end of Stephen's statement. She headed for the food dispenser, punching in her selection. "Sing, how many times have we discussed the sensor ghosts in the Western grid?" she asked, without turning around. "This wasn't a ghost reading," Stephen insisted. "The pattern was consistent across multiple sensors, and it displaced too much water to be anything we've cataloged before." Mary collected her tray and joined us at the table. "The Western grid has been glitchy since that minor seismic event last month. I've got it on the maintenance schedule, but we've had higher priorities." "I can take a look at it tomorrow," I offered, partly to help and partly to calm Stephen down. His enthusiasm was great for team morale, but sometimes it needed channeling in practical directions. "What do you think it could be?" Sheila asked Stephen, her tone gently humoring. "Could be a previously undocumented species," Stephen said, leaning forward. "The deep ocean still holds countless unknowns. We've barely scratched the surface, figuratively speaking, of course." "Or it could be Godzilla," Mary said dryly. Sheila laughed. "Maybe it's the Kraken coming to carry us off to the depths." "Or a sea serpent," I added, joining in the light mood. Everyone chuckled except Stephen. He didn't even smile. Instead, he looked down at his hands, a slight furrow in his brow. It wasn't like him to miss a chance to expand on a scientific joke. Something about what he'd seen had really gotten to him. "Look," I said, feeling a twinge of guilt for dismissing his concern. "I'll check the sensor array first thing tomorrow, probably just a calibration issue or some debris caught in the current. The pressure at this depth can do strange things to our equipment." Stephen nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Thanks, Cooper. I'd appreciate another set of eyes on the data." 17 more days, Mary said, smoothly changing the subject. "Then we're back on the surface with real sunshine and fresh air. And real coffee," Sheila added with a wistful sigh. "I dream about real coffee." "I'm looking forward to seeing stars again," I admitted. "Actual stars, not just lights on a diagnostic panel." The conversation shifted easily to what everyone was looking forward to on the surface. Stephen talked about submitting his research papers. Sheila mentioned a beach vacation she had planned, and Mary was characteristically vague about her post-mission plans. As we talked, I looked around the table at these people who had become more than colleagues. 6 months in close quarters forges bonds that go beyond typical workplace relationships. We'd celebrated birthdays together, weathered equipment failures, and shared the unique experience of living where few humans ever ventured. Despite the tight spaces and occasional frustrations, I felt at home here with this tight-knit crew. We'd settled into a comfortable routine, each of us filling our roles in the mission. Mary led with steady competence. Stephen pursued his research with boundless enthusiasm. Sheila kept us healthy in body and mind, and I kept the systems running that kept us all alive. It worked. The thought that in just over 2 weeks we'd be separating to return to our regular lives seemed strange somehow. After dinner, I helped clean up, then headed to my quarters. The small room was utilitarian, but had become familiar in a way that made it mine. I brushed my teeth in the tiny sink, thinking about the day's events. As I got ready for bed, Stephen's concerned face kept coming back to me. He wasn't usually one to get spooked by sensor readings. As the mission's marine biologist, he'd seen plenty of strange things on our monitoring equipment. For something to have him this worked up was unusual. I pulled back my blanket and sat on the edge of my bunk. Tomorrow, I'd check the sensor array and put his mind at ease. It was probably nothing more than a glitch in the system, or perhaps some ocean debris carried by the currents. I knew how an overactive scientific imagination could turn ordinary occurrences into extraordinary possibilities. That was just Stephen being Stephen, always looking for the next big discovery. I woke up to my entire world shaking. The bed vibrated beneath me, and for a split second, I thought I was dreaming. Then the deep grinding sound of metal under stress cut through the darkness, and I knew this was real. The clock on my bedside table read 2:17 a.m. when the emergency lights kicked on, flooding my quarters with harsh red light. Another violent shudder ran through the habitat, strong enough to knock my tablet off the nightstand. What the hell? I swung my legs over the side of the bed, still half asleep but rapidly coming to full alertness. The comm panel on my wall lit up with Mary's voice, tense but controlled. "All personnel report. Status check now." I stumbled across the room and pressed the talk button. "Cooper here. I'm fine. What's happening?" "Unknown. Get to engineering and check our systems. Something hit us." "On my way," I said, already pulling on my pants and boots. I didn't bother with the rest of my uniform, just grabbed my t-shirt from yesterday and yanked it over my head as I headed for the door. The corridor outside my quarters was bathed in the same red emergency lighting, casting everything in an eerie glow. Stephen emerged from his room across the hall, looking disheveled. "Cooper, did you?" "No time." I cut him off. "Get to command. I'm headed to engineering." I broke into a jog, my mind racing through possibilities. Seismic event, underwater landslide, equipment malfunction. None of them seemed likely. We'd chosen this location specifically because it was geologically stable. The habitat shook again, harder this time. I lost my footing as the floor seemed to drop away beneath me. My shoulder slammed into the wall with enough force to make me grunt in pain. I caught myself before I fell, bracing against the wall until the shaking stopped. That wasn't random. Something had hit us, something big. I picked up my pace, half jogging, half stumbling down the corridor toward engineering. The emergency lights made everything look surreal, turning familiar spaces into something alien and threatening. When I reached engineering, I went straight to the main console and pulled up the system diagnostics. The habitat's structural integrity indicators were showing stress points across multiple sections. Whatever was happening, it was affecting the entire station. I tapped the controls to bring up the external camera feeds. Most showed nothing but the dark ocean, illuminated only by our exterior lights. But camera 4, positioned on the western quadrant where Stephen had reported something on the sensors last night, showed movement. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. A massive shape moved through the frame, partially illuminated by our exterior lights. It was huge, at least 20 feet long, maybe more. The creature circled just at the edge of visibility, its massive tail propelling it through the water, with frightening speed and power. I grabbed the comm panel. "Mary, you need to see this right now." "What am I looking at, Cooper?" "Camera 4, western quadrant." I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. Stephen was right. I heard Mary's sharp intake of breath over the comm. "I'm on my way. Stay put." It took less than 2 minutes for Mary to arrive, with Sheila and Stephen right behind her. All of us were in various states of undress. Mary in a tank top and uniform pants. Stephen in pajama bottoms and a hastily buttoned shirt. Sheila in what looked like gym clothes. "Is that what I think it is?" Mary asked, leaning over my shoulder to get a better look at the monitor. Stephen pushed his glasses up his nose, his face pale in the red emergency lighting. "It's what I saw on the sensors yesterday, but bigger than I thought, much bigger." The creature circled back into view, and this time we got a clear look at its profile. The distinctive shape was unmistakable, a shark, but of impossible size. "That can't be what I think it is," Sheila whispered. Stephen's voice was oddly calm, almost reverent. "It's a megalodon. Has to be." "That's impossible," I said. "They've been extinct for millions of years." "I know what I'm looking at," Stephen insisted. "Look at the dorsal fin shape, the tail configuration, the overall body proportions. It's a Carcharocles megalodon, an adult specimen based on the size." Another violent impact rocked the station, throwing us all off balance. I grabbed the console to stay upright. Warning lights flashed across my control panel. I scanned the readings quickly, my heart sinking. "Hull integrity down to 92%, I reported, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "That thing is targeting us." "Why would it attack the habitat?" Sheila asked, gripping the back of my chair. "Territorial behavior," Stephen suggested. "Or it might be sensing our electrical systems. Sharks can detect electromagnetic fields." The creature moved past another camera, and I switched the main display to follow it. It was circling toward the observation pod on the eastern side of the habitat. "It's heading for the viewport in pod 4, I said. Mary's face hardened into the expression I recognized from our emergency drills. "Options, Cooper. Give me options." I ran through scenarios in my head, discarding one after another. "We can't outrun it. We can't fight it. Our best bet is the emergency submersible in pod 3. "That's on the opposite side from where it's attacking now," Mary noted. "Exactly. If we move fast, we might reach it before that thing circles back around." I pulled up the station schematic on a secondary monitor. "The sub can get us to the surface in under 30 minutes. Mary nodded sharply. "Sheila, grab the emergency medical kit. Stephen, collect the research data drives from the main lab. Just the essentials. Cooper, prep the submersible. I'll secure the command logs." We meet at pod 3 inches 10 minutes. Another impact, even more violent than before, sent tremors through the habitat. A deep groaning sound of metal under stress filled the air. "Move," Mary ordered. We scattered. I sprinted through the corridors, heading for pod 3. The habitat's layout was designed with emergency evacuation in mind. Straight paths between critical areas, minimal obstacles, but running while the floor kept shaking beneath my feet made the journey challenging. I heard another impact as I reached the junction between pods 2 and 3. This one was followed by a new sound, the high-pitched whine of a pressure alarm. Somewhere, the habitat was starting to leak. The door to pod 3 was just ahead. I could see the submersible through the circular window in the access hatch. Our ticket out of this nightmare. I reached for the door controls just as the habitat groaned under another violent impact from the ancient predator. The Pod 3 access hatch slid open with a hydraulic hiss. The red emergency lights cast an eerie glow across the submersible bay as I rushed inside, my footsteps echoing on the metal floor. The submersible sat in its cradle, our sleek underwater lifeboat designed for exactly this kind of emergency. But as I got closer, I noticed something that made me stop in my tracks. The docking clamps were misaligned. One of them was bent at an awkward angle, pressing against the hull of the sub. No, 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 I muttered, circling around to get a better look. I climbed onto the access platform and peered through the viewport. That's when I spotted it. A thin line running across the curved glass, barely visible in the dim emergency lighting. I traced it with my finger from the outside. A hairline crack. Small, but potentially catastrophic under pressure. I jumped down from the platform and ran to the control console, pulling up the submersible diagnostics. The screen confirmed what I already knew. The docking mechanism was jammed, and the viewport integrity was compromised. We couldn't use it. Our escape route was blocked. The door to Pod 3 opened again, and Mary rushed in, followed by Sheila and Stephen. They all carried small bags, the emergency supplies and data drives we'd agreed to bring. "Cooper, status report," Mary said, her voice steady despite everything. I turned to face her, hating what I had to say. "The sub's damaged, docking mechanism is jammed, and there's a crack in the main viewport. We can't use it. It would implode as soon as we hit depth." Mary's expression didn't change, but I saw her shoulders tense. "Are you certain?" "Completely. Look." I pointed to the diagnostic screen, then to the visible damage on the submersible itself. Stephen stepped forward, squinting at the hairline crack. "Could we patch it? Some kind of emergency seal?" I shook my head. "Not with what we have on hand. That viewport is designed to withstand extreme pressure. Any makeshift patch would fail instantly." When another violent impact cut me off mid-sentence. This one was worse than before. The entire habitat seemed to lurch sideways. I grabbed the console to stay upright while Sheila stumbled against the wall. A new alarm joined the chorus of warnings already blaring throughout the station. "We need to get back to command," Mary said, already heading for the door. "Cooper, with me. We need options." We rushed through the corridor, the red emergency lights casting our shadows in front of us. The path back to the command center took us through Pod 2, where I could hear the distinct sound of water spraying from a breach somewhere nearby. "Leak in Pod 2, I said as we ran. "Not critical yet, but it's going to get worse." Mary nodded but didn't slow down. "How long until total failure if that thing keeps hitting us?" "Depends on where it strikes, but not long. Maybe an hour, less if it finds a structural weak point." We reached the command center, Stephen and Sheila right behind us. I immediately went to the main console and pulled up the structural integrity display. The numbers made my stomach drop. "Hull integrity down to 78%, I announced, pointing to the flashing indicators on the screen. "Most of the damage is concentrated in Pod 1, near the primary lab." Mary leaned over my shoulder, studying the display. "It's hitting the same section repeatedly." I nodded, pulling up the external camera feeds. Most screens showed only dark ocean, but on camera 2, we caught glimpses of movement, a massive shadow passing in and out of view. "There," Stephen said, pointing to the screen. "It's circling back around." We watched in stunned silence as the enormous shape retreated into the darkness, then turned and charged directly at Pod 1. The impact shook the command center, rattling equipment and knocking a tablet off a nearby desk. "It's attacking the same spot over and over," I said, checking the integrity display again. "Like it knows where to hit us." Sheila leaned against the console, her face pale in the emergency lighting. "That's impossible. How would it know?" Stephen adjusted his glasses, his eyes never leaving the camera feed. "Sharks can sense electrical fields. Our equipment generates a lot of them. It might be attracted to the highest concentration of electrical activity." I pointed to the schematic on the screen. "That would be the primary lab. We've got most of our heavy equipment running in there." Another impact rocked the station. I grabbed the edge of the console as the lights flickered momentarily. "Hull integrity now at 72%, I reported, watching the numbers drop in real time. Mary's expression was grim but determined. "We need to drive it away somehow. Give us time to think of another escape plan." "With what?" I asked, gesturing around us. We don't exactly have underwater defenses. What about an electrical discharge? Sheila suggested, like those shark repellent devices they use near beaches. I shook my head. The electrical field would just scatter in the water. We'd need something much more powerful to affect something that size. Sound then? Stephen said. Loud, disruptive frequencies through the external speakers. Our speakers aren't powerful enough, I replied. They're designed for communication with divers, not as weapons. On the screen, we watched the massive shape retreat again, circling wide before turning back toward the station. Its approach was methodical, deliberate, like it was testing us, looking for weaknesses. It's coming back, Mary warned. This time, we saw it clearly on the external feed. The enormous prehistoric shark, at least 20 feet long, charging directly at the main viewport of Pod 1. The impact was catastrophic. I watched in horror as cracks spread across the reinforced glass like a spiderweb. A new alarm blared, this one more urgent than the others. Viewport integrity critical, I said, my voice tight. One more hit like that and it could shatter. The integrity display updated, 59%. Mary looked around at all of us. Options. Now, anything we haven't considered. Weapons? Sheila asked. There must be something we can use. I shook my head. The Triton's a research station. We don't have weapons. What about the maintenance robots? Stephen suggested. Could we send them out to distract it? They're too small, I said. That thing would barely notice them. The conversation grew more desperate as we frantically searched for solutions. Mary suggested emergency protocols I knew wouldn't work. Sheila proposed medical supplies that couldn't be repurposed. Stephen offered scientific theories that wouldn't help us in time. All the while, I stared at the station schematics displayed on the command console. My mind raced through potential solutions, discarding one after another as impractical or impossible. The emergency flares, I said suddenly. If we could set them off outside the station, the light might drive it away. Mary finished my thought. But how do we deploy them? Before I could answer, another bone-jarring impact hit the station. This one was different. I felt the floor shift beneath my feet, heard the groan of metal under extreme stress. The integrity display flashed red, 52%. I stared at the numbers, knowing we were running out of time. The megalodon was systematically destroying our home, and we had nothing to fight back with. No weapons, no defenses, just 4 humans trapped in a failing metal box at the bottom of the ocean. And a prehistoric monster that shouldn't exist was about to break through. And then it hit me. Not the megalodon, an idea. I know how to stop it, I said, turning away from the console. 3 pairs of eyes locked onto me. Mary stood rigid, her commander's posture barely hiding her tension. Stephen had his arms wrapped around his data drives like they were precious children. Sheila gripped the medical kit, knuckles white against the red case. What? Mary asked. The waste system. I moved to a different terminal and pulled up the station schematics. We've been down here 6 months. That's 6 months of human waste, food waste, chemical runoff, all the nastiest stuff we produce. It's stored in containment tanks before scheduled processing. Mary stepped closer, looking at the schematic. You want to use our garbage against it? Exactly. I pointed to the tanks at the bottom of the station layout. Most predators are territorial. They mark their territory with scent. If we release our waste into the water around the station, it might trigger a territorial response. Make the megalodon think this area is already claimed by something dangerous. Stephen's eyes widened. Biological deterrence, like how sharks react to orca presence, right? I nodded. We can't fight it, but maybe we can make it think something bigger and meaner has already claimed the spot. Sheila caught on immediately. The chemical compounds in our waste, especially after 6 months of concentration, would create a strong biological signal. Ammonia, bacteria, all of it. Another impact rocked the station. I grabbed the edge of the console to stay upright. How do we release it? Mary asked, cutting to the heart of the issue. I pulled up a more detailed schematic. The waste system has emergency purge valves. They're meant for controlled disposal if the processing system fails, but I can override them to release everything at once. Where are the controls? Mary's question came with the next logical problem. I zoomed in on the station layout. That's the issue. The main control junction is in the maintenance shaft directly beneath Pod 1. Pod 1? Stephen stepped forward. That's where the megalodon is focusing its attacks. I know. I checked the integrity display again. 50% now. But it's our only option. That's suicide, Marcus said from the doorway. I hadn't even noticed him enter. He was one of the junior technicians, usually quiet, but now his face was flushed with fear. You'll never make it through Pod 1. I don't need to go through it, I explained. I can access the maintenance shaft from Pod 2 and crawl underneath to reach the junction. Mary considered this. The creature seems to be attacking the outer hull. The maintenance shaft runs through the central support structure. Exactly. I traced the route on the screen. It'll be tight, but I can reach the controls without exposing myself to the areas being attacked. Another violent impact shook the station. The lights flickered. Hull integrity at 48%, the automated system announced. Marcus shook his head. This is crazy. We should head to the emergency shelters and wait for the rescue team. The rescue team is 2 days out, Mary said, her voice flat. We have maybe 30 minutes before this place breaks apart. I looked at her. I need to go now. She nodded once. Do it. I moved to the equipment locker and pulled out a standard toolkit. No time to grab anything special. The basic tools would have to do. Keep me updated through the comm, I said, clipping the small device to my collar. And try to monitor the creature's position if you can. We'll guide you, Mary promised. Sheila stepped forward and grabbed my arm. Be careful, that maintenance shaft wasn't designed for comfort. I'll be fine. I gave her a quick nod. Just be ready to move once I release the waste. We might need to relocate to a more secure section if the megalodon goes into a frenzy. With the toolkit secured to my belt, I headed for the exit. No time for goodbyes or pep talks. Each second counted. I sprinted through the corridor, passing the junction to Pod 1. The metal walls groaned under the strain of another impact. I felt the floor vibrate beneath my feet as I ran. My breathing came in controlled bursts, keeping pace with my footsteps. The route to the maintenance shaft access point was clear in my mind. 6 months of living in this underwater box meant I knew every inch of it. Left at the next junction, straight past the lab entrance, right at the storage room. Another impact, stronger than before. I stumbled against the wall, caught myself, and kept moving. Cooper, the creature is circling back around. Mary's voice came through the comm. It's approaching Pod 2 now. Almost at the access point, I replied, pushing myself faster. The maintenance hatch was located in a small alcove near the environmental control room. I dropped to my knees and pulled the release lever. The hatch popped open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. I'm at the hatch, I reported. Going in now. Hull integrity at 46%, the automated system announced overhead. I lowered myself into the opening. The maintenance shaft was exactly as advertised. A cramped tube of metal barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. Pipes and conduits ran along the sides, carrying various fluids and cables throughout the station. Just as my feet cleared the opening, another impact rocked the station. This one felt different, more focused, like the creature had found a new weak point. That hit was on Pod 2, Mary confirmed through the comm. It seems to be working its way around the station systematically. Great, I muttered. It's learning. I pulled the hatch closed above me and secured it. At least this way, if a breach occurred in the corridors above, the maintenance shaft would remain sealed. The red emergency lights cast an eerie glow in the narrow space. I began crawling forward, moving as quickly as possible in the confined area. The metal was cold against my hands and knees, and the hum of the station system surrounded me. How far to the junction? Mary asked. I checked the small tracking display on my wrist. Standard equipment for engineers who worked in these shafts. About 40 m, I replied. Should take me 3 minutes if nothing else goes wrong. 2 more impacts hit in quick succession. The shaft shook violently, and I had to press my back against the top to avoid being bounced against the pipes below. Hull integrity at 43%, came the automated warning. Cooper, you need to hurry. Mary's voice was tense but controlled. At this rate, we have maybe 15 minutes before critical failure. I didn't waste breath responding. Instead, I pushed forward faster, ignoring the way the metal edges scraped against my shoulders and elbows. Each meter gained was another step toward our only chance of survival. The shaft narrowed as I approached a junction point. I had to turn sideways to squeeze past a cluster of thick pipes. My toolkit caught on something, and I had to yank it free. Status update, Mary demanded through the comm. 20 m out, I replied, voice strained from the awkward position. The shaft narrows here, slowing me down. Another impact, this one directly above me. I heard the horrible sound of metal tearing, followed by the spray of water. "We've got a breach in Pod 2, Sheila reported. "Section C is flooding." "Seal it off," Mary ordered. I kept moving, trying to ignore what was happening above. My job was to reach the waste management controls. Nothing else mattered right now. The shaft widened again after the junction, allowing me to move faster. I could see the control panel ahead, a small green light indicating it was still operational. The entire station shuddered, not from an impact this time, but from structural stress. The integrity was failing across multiple points now. Sweat dripped from my forehead, stinging my eyes. The air in the maintenance shaft was getting warmer as the environmental system struggled under the damage. "Hull integrity at 40%, the automated system announced. I reached the waste management junction and pulled myself into a sitting position. The control panel was designed for maintenance checks, not emergency operations. I would need to override several safety protocols to dump the entire waste load at once. "I'm at the controls," I reported, unclipping the toolkit from my belt. "What's your plan?" Mary asked. I pulled out a small screwdriver and removed the panel cover. "I need to bypass the safety interlocks. Give me 2 minutes." "We might not have 2 minutes," Stephen's voice cut in. "The creature is back at Pod 1 and hitting harder than before." As if to confirm his words, another massive impact shook the station. I braced myself against the pipes to avoid hitting my head. The vibrations traveled through the metal surrounding me, getting stronger with each hit. The megalodon was determined to break through, and it was getting closer to succeeding with every attack. I worked quickly, connecting jumper wires across the safety circuits. My fingers moved with practiced precision despite the pressure. This was what I was trained for, solving problems when everything was falling apart. "Almost there," I said, connecting the final bypass. "Once I activate this, all waste tanks will purge simultaneously. The release points are distributed around the station's exterior." Another violent impact. I heard the groan of metal giving way somewhere above me. "Hull integrity at 38%, the automated system warned. Sweat ran down my neck as I finished the final connections. The control panel beeped, indicating the override was ready. "Command, I'm in position," I reported, my finger hovering over the emergency release button. "Waste purge system is ready to activate." "Cooper, what's your status?" Mary's voice crackled through my comm, tension making her usually steady voice pitch higher. The small maintenance screen flashed multiple warnings as I accessed the override menu. Each alert demanded confirmation, requiring a rapid sequence of commands to move forward. My fingers tapped across the panel, dismissing safety warnings that under normal circumstances would never be ignored. Warning: containment system bypass requires authorization. Warning: simultaneous purge exceeds safety parameters. Warning: pressure differential exceeds recommended limits. I canceled each warning with quick keystrokes. The station's computer wasn't programmed to understand that dying from a prehistoric shark attack wasn't in the safety manual. "Hull integrity now at 36%, came the automated announcement through my comm. Its mechanical calm a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around us. "Cooper," Stephen's voice cut in. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster." A violent shudder ran through the metal beneath me. I braced myself against the curved wall of the maintenance tube, fighting to keep my position at the control panel. The confined space made it hard to work. I could barely extend my arms without hitting pipes or conduits. "I'm redirecting the flow conduits now," I said, voice strained as I stretched to reach a secondary control panel. "Have to override 6 months of waste storage protocols." My training had never covered using human waste as a weapon against extinct predators. The irony wasn't lost on me as I frantically rewired the panel, connecting jumpers across safety circuits that would normally prevent a catastrophic dump of biological and chemical waste. The small screen showed the schematic of the station's waste system. 6 large containment tanks positioned strategically around the exterior. Normally, these would be emptied in controlled amounts during scheduled maintenance. Today, I was setting them to blow their entire contents simultaneously into the surrounding ocean. "Cooper," Marcus's voice, now high with panic. "The thing is right outside the main viewport. Oh God, it's opening its mouth. It's going to bite right through." I felt my heart race as I made the final connections. "Almost ready, standby." My fingers flew over the controls, redirecting the emergency flush protocols to all 6 tanks. The screen now showed all tanks highlighted in red, primed for release. "I'm ready," I announced, my palm hovering over the emergency flush button. "Just say when." Mary's voice came back, unnaturally calm. "Everyone brace for impact. Cooper, on my mark." I placed my hand firmly on the button, muscles tense with anticipation. The maintenance shaft felt impossibly small now, like it was closing in around me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heartbeat. "The creature is positioning for another strike," Mary said, her voice tight but controlled. "On my mark, Cooper. 3. I watched the warning lights flash across the control panel. Everything was ready. The safety interlocks bypassed, the flow conduits redirected, all 6 tanks primed for simultaneous release. Tfo! I pictured the massive prehistoric shark outside, its jaws wide enough to crush through our viewport in a single bite. 6 months of human waste and chemical runoff was about to become our most unlikely weapon. 1. I closed my eyes for a split second. Now, I slammed my hand down on the emergency flush command. The panel lit up with confirmation lights as the system engaged. Almost instantly, the entire station lurched violently, the metal around me groaning under tremendous pressure. The maintenance shaft shook so hard I had to grab a nearby pipe to keep from smashing my head against the ceiling. The station's computer spoke over the comm. "Warning, critical pressure event, waste containment failure." But this wasn't failure. It was exactly what we wanted. 6 months of concentrated waste was explosively discharging through external vents, directly beneath where the megalodon had positioned itself for attack. The maintenance shaft continued to vibrate as thousands of gallons of waste pushed through systems never designed for this volume or speed. Pipes rattled against their moorings, and somewhere distant, I heard the screech of metal under strain. "Holy," Marcus's voice burst through the comm, followed by what sounded like an incredulous laugh. "Cooper, it worked. The monster just got hit with everything at once. It's convulsing in the cloud. The water around it is turning brown and green." "Can you confirm it's moving away?" Mary asked sharply. "Not yet," Stephen replied. "It's thrashing around right outside the viewport. Looks like it got a direct hit in the face and gills." I allowed myself a moment of relief, slumping against the control panel. The emergency lights continued to flash, but the worst of the station's shuddering had stopped as the tanks emptied. "Cooper, get back to command," Mary ordered. "We need to assess damage and monitor if this actually drives it away, or just makes it angrier." "On my way," I said, disconnecting the jumper wires I'd used to bypass the safety systems. I twisted around in the cramped space and began crawling back the way I'd come, moving as fast as possible through the maintenance shaft. Every few seconds, a fresh update came through the comm. "It's still thrashing," Sheila reported. "Looks disoriented. Water clarity dropping rapidly around the station," Stephen added. "The waste cloud is expanding, visibility down to maybe 10 feet and decreasing." I reached the access hatch and pushed it open, hauling myself out of the maintenance shaft and back into the main corridor. My uniform was soaked with sweat and my hands were shaking from adrenaline and exertion. "Hull integrity holding at 36%, Marcus said as I jogged through the corridor toward command. "No new impacts detected." I passed through Pod 2, noticing the water leaking from ceiling panels where earlier impacts had compromised the seals. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but we weren't going to last down here much longer. This had to work. "The creature's moving." Stephen's excited voice filled my earpiece. "It's swimming erratically, heading away from the station." I pushed myself to run faster, arriving at the command center just as the main viewport camera feed showed the massive shape of the megalodon thrashing violently in the murky water. The waste discharge had created a thick, cloudy plume that surrounded our station, and the prehistoric shark was clearly in distress. Its massive body contorted as it tried to escape the contamination, powerful tail sweeping from side to side. "Look at the size of that thing," I gasped, moving to stand between Mary and Stephen at the main console. On screen, we could see the megalodon's silhouette through the murky water, easily 20 feet long, with the distinctive shape of its prehistoric dorsal fin cutting through the cloud of waste. "The territorial response is working," Stephen said, his eyes wide with scientific fascination despite our dire situation. "It's treating the waste like another predator's marking. See how it's trying to get away from the scent?" We watched in stunned silence as the massive shark continued its erratic swimming, each movement taking it farther from our station. Its powerful body thrashed once more before turning decisively away from us, swimming with surprising speed into the darkness of the open ocean. Distance increasing, Marcus confirmed, checking the sensor readings. Now 50 m, 75, 100 m, and still moving away. Mary let out a long, slow breath. Keep tracking it. I want to know if it circles back. I collapsed into the nearest chair, the adrenaline that had kept me going suddenly draining away. Through the viewport, I could see nothing but the cloudy water. Our emergency purge had created a murky shield that had saved us from certain death. Nice work, Cooper, Mary said briefly, squeezing my shoulder. That was quick thinking. Let's hope it doesn't decide to come back for round 2, I said, watching the sensor display as the creature's signature continued to move farther from the station. I stared at the readouts, rubbing my eyes to make sure I was seeing correctly. Hull integrity is holding at 34%, I said, turning to face the others. If that thing doesn't come back, we should stay in one piece. Stephen laughed, a sound that seemed out of place after the tension of the last hour. We just saved ourselves with literal crap, 6 months of it. Best use of waste I've ever seen, Sheila said, smiling despite the exhaustion evident on her face. Marcus shook his head. That was the most disgusting plan I've ever been part of, and I love it. I joined their laughter, feeling the release of tension wash over me. We were alive. The monster, or megalodon, as Stephen insisted on calling it, was gone. For now, at least. I'll run a full diagnostic, I said, already turning back to the console. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with. As I worked, the habitat made a low, groaning sound that made everyone freeze. What was that? Sheila asked, her smile vanishing. I kept my voice steady. Just the structure settling. The attack put stress on the support frames. But I didn't like the sound, not one bit. I'd spent enough time in underwater habitats to know the difference between normal creeks and something more concerning. Everyone get some rest, Mary ordered, though her eyes stayed fixed on me. Cooper, what do you need? Time and tools, I said. And maybe Marcus, if he's up for it. Marcus nodded, moving to stand beside me at the console. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of repair work. I barely noticed when day shifted to night on the station's artificial cycle. Every system needed attention, power distribution, life support, structural reinforcement. I crawled through maintenance shafts, rewired damaged circuits, and patched what I could. Pass me that sealant gun, I said to Marcus as we worked on reinforcing a junction between pods 2 and 3. He'd proven himself useful, following my instructions without complaint, even as we entered our 18th hour of repairs. How much longer can we keep this up? He asked, handing me the tool. I wiped sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. As long as we have to. The station made another unsettling noise, a high-pitched whine followed by a deeper groan. I placed my palm flat against the wall, feeling the subtle vibrations. I don't like that, I muttered. Me neither, Marcus agreed. I checked my tablet. Life support is stable at least. Oxygen recycling is back up to 91%. That's something, Marcus said. I was about to respond when my comm buzzed. It was Sheila. Cooper, we've got a problem in Pod 1. Water's coming in through microfractures in the east wall. I cursed under my breath. On my way, Marcus finished securing this section. I jogged through the connecting corridor to Pod 1, where I found Sheila pressing emergency sealant patches against a section of wall where water was seeping through in thin streams. It started about 10 minutes ago, she explained, not looking away from her task. Just a few drops at first. I ran my hand along the wall, feeling the cool dampness. These are stress fractures. The hull flexed during the attack, and now it's giving way. I pulled out my tablet and checked the structural integrity readings. The numbers weren't good. We need to seal off Pod 1, I said after a moment. It's too damaged to save, and if it goes, it could drag down the rest of the station. Sheila looked around at the medical equipment stored in the pod. I need to move my supplies first. We've got 30 minutes max, I told her. Get Stephen and Marcus to help you. While Sheila organized the evacuation of essential medical supplies, I worked on preparing the bulkhead seals that would isolate Pod 1 from the rest of the habitat. It was a last resort measure, one I'd never actually had to implement before. 2 hours later, we stood on the safe side of the sealed bulkhead, watching through the small circular window as water continued to find new paths into Pod 1. That buys us some time, I said, not mentioning how little time it might actually be. What's next? Sheila asked. Communications, I replied. We need to let the surface know what's happening. The backup communication array had been damaged during the attack, but it was our only hope of contacting the surface now that the main system was in Pod 1. I spent the next 4 hours disassembling and rebuilding the array, replacing damaged components with parts salvaged from less critical systems. "Try it now," I told Mary, who had joined me in what had become our makeshift command center in Pod 2. Mary activated the comm system and began broadcasting our emergency signal. "Triton Station to Surface Control. Do you copy? This is Commander Mary Thomas reporting an emergency situation. We require immediate evacuation. Repeat. Triton Station to Surface Control." After several tense minutes of repeated attempts, the speaker crackled. "Reading you. Status. Repeat." The signal was weak, broken by static, but it was something. Mary's eyes met mine, a flash of hope passing between us. "Surface Control, this is Triton Station. We have suffered catastrophic damage from an unknown marine entity. Hull integrity at critical levels. Request immediate evacuation. Over." More static then. "Copy. Sending. Hours. Hold position." "They're sending help," Mary said, her shoulders sagging with relief. "How long?" I asked. "I couldn't make it out clearly," she admitted. "But they know we're here. They're coming." I nodded, too tired to celebrate properly. "I need to check the integrity monitors again." "When's the last time you slept, Cooper?" Mary asked, her voice softening. I had to think about it. "Before the attack, I guess." "Get some rest. That's an order." I tried to sleep. I really did. But every groan of the habitat, every subtle shift in pressure had me sitting up, heart racing. After 20 minutes of this, I gave up and returned to my rounds, checking readouts and making minor adjustments to keep our systems balanced. The next morning, if you could call it morning in an underwater habitat with artificial lighting, I was checking power distribution when Marcus burst into the room. "Cooper, you need to see this," he said, his voice tight with worry. I followed him to the sensor station where he pointed to a readout I hadn't been monitoring. "Seismic activity around the thermal vents has increased by 300% in the last 6 hours, he explained. I studied the data, feeling a new knot form in my stomach. "If those vents become more active, it could cause secondary structural damage," Marcus finished for me. I ran a hand through my hair, which was greasy from lack of washing. "We need to move everything to Pod 4. It's the farthest from the vents and showed the least stress during the attack." Mary approved the plan immediately, and soon all 5 of us were working to relocate our essential equipment, supplies, and systems to the most stable remaining section of the habitat. It was exhausting work, made worse by the constant anxiety that the station might give way at any moment. "Last crate," Stephen announced as he and Marcus carried a container of scientific equipment into Pod 4. "Good," Mary said. "Cooper, status?" I looked up from the power distribution panel I was rewiring. "This is the hard part. We need to keep life support running across the station, but concentrate our power reserves here in Pod 4. "Can you do it?" Mary asked. I took a deep breath. "I have to." The next several hours were a careful balancing act. Shut down too many systems in the damaged pods, and we risked losing vital monitoring capabilities. Leave too much running, and we'd drain our power reserves before help arrived. Every decision was a compromise, and I felt the weight of each one. Oxygen recycling to Pod 3, reduced to minimum levels. I muttered to myself as I made adjustments, redirecting power to Pod 4 life support and communications. My eyes burned from fatigue and my hands weren't as steady as I needed them to be. I'd been working almost non-stop since the attack, and it was catching up to me. But there was no time to rest, not when every system failure could be the one that doomed us all. "Cooper," Mary's voice came from behind me. "The surface contacted us again. Rescue vessel will be here in approximately 12 hours. I nodded without looking up from my work. "We'll be ready." I adjusted another setting, watching as power levels shifted across the distribution grid. The balance was precarious, but holding. The next thing I knew, someone was grabbing my shoulder and shaking me hard. "Cooper, Cooper, wake up!" I jerked awake, momentarily confused about where I was. Marcus's face hovered inches from mine, eyes wide with panic. What's happening?" I asked, my brain still foggy from sleep. "The external sensors picked up movement again," Marcus said, his voice tight with fear. "Something big, circling just outside camera range." That snapped me fully awake. I pushed myself up, ignoring the protest from my stiff muscles. How long was I out? I asked, checking my watch. Maybe an hour. Mary sent me to find you when the sensors started going crazy. An hour? Not the 15 minutes I'd promised myself, but nowhere near enough rest either. I rubbed my face, trying to clear the cobwebs from my mind. Show me, I said, following Marcus to the nearest console. He pulled up the sensor grid, and I leaned in close. Sure enough, there were movement signatures registering on the outer perimeter, large ones. My stomach tightened. Could be a system malfunction, I said, more hopeful than convinced. The sensors took a beating during the attack. Mary wants you in engineering to check, Marcus replied. I nodded and headed for the door, moving as fast as my tired legs would carry me. Engineering was now a makeshift setup in Pod 4 after we'd relocated the essential systems. As I jogged through the corridor, I tried to convince myself this was just a false alarm, a glitch in the sensors after all the damage we'd sustained. When I reached engineering, Mary was already there, studying the readouts with intense concentration. Stephen and Sheila stood nearby, their faces tense. Cooper, Mary said as soon as she saw me. The movement signatures. What do you make of them? I slid into the chair in front of the main console and pulled up the sensor data, studying the patterns. The signature showed something large moving in a circular pattern around the station, just beyond the range of our external cameras. Could be the Megalodon back for round 2, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Or it could be sensor ghosts. The attack damaged a lot of our systems. I tapped a few commands into the console, bringing up the camera feeds. Most of our external cameras had been damaged in the attack, but the few that still worked showed only murky water. The waste we discharged had created a cloudy environment around the station, making visual confirmation difficult. Nothing clear on the cameras, I reported. The water's still too cloudy from the waste discharge. Mary nodded, her expression grim. We need to prepare for the worst-case scenario. If it's back, we need to be ready. She turned to the others. Stephen, monitor the sensor grid. Report any changes in the movement pattern immediately. Sheila, check our medical supplies and prepare for possible injuries if we take more damage. Marcus, help Cooper with whatever he needs. They all nodded and moved to their assigned tasks. Mary had slipped effortlessly into crisis management mode, her voice calm but authoritative. What do you need from me? She asked, turning back to me. I need to check if we have enough waste accumulated to try our defense strategy again, I said, pulling up the waste management systems. And I should look at the flush mechanism. It was a rush job last time. I can make improvements if we need to use it again. Mary nodded. Do it, I'll coordinate from command. As she left, I dived into the waste management system data. We'd only been operational for about 12 hours since the last discharge, but the station generated waste continuously. Marcus, check the levels in tanks 2 and 3, I said, pointing to another console. Marcus pulled up the data. Tank 2 at 17% capacity, Tank 3 at 22%. I did some quick calculations. Combined with the other tanks, we're at about 30% of what we discharged last time. Not ideal, but it could be enough to drive it away again if we need to. If it's even out there, Marcus added hopefully. Yeah, I agreed, wanting to believe it was just a sensor malfunction. Let me look at the flush mechanism. We can make it better this time. I pulled up the schematics for the emergency purge system. Last time, we'd basically dumped everything at once in all directions. Effective but wasteful. With some modifications, we could get more precise directional control. Hand me that tablet, I said to Marcus, pointing to a device on the nearby workstation. I transferred the schematics to the tablet and started making annotations, marking where modifications could be made. We can add control valves to the main discharge conduits. Give us the ability to direct the flow more precisely. Marcus looked over my shoulder. So we could target wherever the creature is, instead of just dumping everywhere? Exactly, I nodded. More efficient use of limited resources. I spent the next hour implementing the modifications, rerouting control systems, and reprogramming the emergency purge protocols. Marcus helped, following my instructions to adjust physical components while I handled the software changes. Cooper, Stephen's voice came through the comm. Still tracking movement, but it's staying outside visual range. Keep me posted, I replied, focusing on finishing the modifications. Just as I was completing the final programming changes, the habitat shuddered, not violently like during the Megalodon attack, but a distinct vibration that ran through the metal around us. What was that? Marcus asked, eyes wide. My heart sank. It could be back. But something felt off. The vibration wasn't the same as before. The megalodon's attacks had been direct impacts against the hull, sharp, violent jolts. This felt more like a continuous vibration coming through the station's foundation. "Cooper," Mary's voice came through the comm. "Was that an impact?" "I don't think so," I replied, frowning. It felt different, more like vibrations coming up through the seafloor. "The seismic sensors," I said suddenly, turning to a different console. "Marcus, pull up the seismic data." Marcus tapped the controls, bringing up the readings from the sensors that monitored the seafloor around the station. The display showed increased activity near the thermal vents about a kilometer from our position. "It's the vents," I said, feeling a mix of relief and concern. "We're getting tremors from the thermal vent field." "Not the megalodon?" Mary asked. "No, these are seismic tremors," I confirmed. "But they're stronger than normal. The sensors show increased activity in the whole field." Another tremor shook the station. This one stronger than the last. Warning lights flashed on one of the consoles. "That's not good," I muttered, moving quickly to check the alert. The power distribution grid was showing fluctuations. The added stress from the tremors was putting pressure on our already damaged systems. "Mary, we've got power fluctuations," I reported. "The tremors are affecting the—" Before I could finish, a loud pop came from one of the relay panels, followed by sparks and smoke. A section of the power grid went dark on the display. "Power relay overloaded," I called out, rushing to the damaged panel. "Marcus, cut power to section 4B. Marcus scrambled to the main power console and hit the emergency cutoff. The sparking stopped, but the damage was done. "If we don't stabilize the power grid, we could lose life support," I said, examining the damage. "The overload could cascade through the system." I grabbed a toolkit from under the console and pulled the access panel off the damaged relay. The components inside were blackened and melted. "I need replacement parts," I said, digging through the toolkit. "There should be spare relays in the storage locker." Marcus hurried to the locker and returned with a box of components. I dug through it, finding the parts I needed. "Hold this," I told him, handing him a flashlight. "Shine it right here." As I worked to replace the damaged relay, another tremor shook the station. I braced myself against the wall, waiting for it to pass before continuing my work. "How bad is it?" Mary asked through the comm. "Bad, but fixable," I replied, carefully removing the melted components. "The relay took the brunt of it. If we can replace it before another surge hits, we can prevent a cascade failure." I worked as quickly as I could, my fingers moving automatically through the familiar process of replacing the relay. It was delicate work, made harder by the occasional tremors that shook the station. "Almost got it," I muttered, connecting the final wires. As I was securing the new relay in place, I noticed something on the external housing of the power conduit, a pattern of corrosion that hadn't been there during our previous maintenance checks. I leaned in closer, examining the corroded metal. The pattern was unusual, concentrated around the external sensor connections. "That's strange," I said, running my finger along the corrosion. "What is it?" Marcus asked, leaning in to look. "This corrosion pattern. It's new," I said, frowning, "and it's only on components connected to external systems." I finished installing the relay and sealed the panel, then moved to check other external connections. Each one showed similar patterns of accelerated corrosion. "Marcus, pull up the chemical analysis of our waste discharge," I said, a theory forming in my mind. Marcus complied, bringing the data up on a nearby screen. I studied the chemical composition, focusing on the interaction between our waste chemicals and the seawater. "Just as I thought," I said grimly. "The chemical mixture we dumped, it's highly corrosive in salt water. The discharge that drove away the megalodon has been eating away at our external systems." I sat back, the implications hitting me. Our desperate defense measure had worked to save us from immediate danger, but it had created a new problem, one that was quietly damaging our already compromised station. "The waste discharge damaged our external systems," I said, looking at the corroded components. "We saved ourselves from the megalodon, only to put ourselves in a different kind of danger." I touched the corroded metal again, my mind racing through potential solutions to yet another problem threatening our survival. 3 days had passed since the megalodon attack. I hadn't slept much, maybe 6 hours total, and my back hurt from crawling through maintenance shafts to fix damaged systems. I sat at the monitoring station in Pod 4, where we'd consolidated our operations, watching external camera feeds. The screens showed nothing but murky water and the occasional fish. The corrosion from our waste discharge had spread to several external systems, making our situation more precarious by the hour. "Come on," I muttered, tapping my fingers on the console. "Where are you guys?" The surface team had confirmed they were sending a rescue submersible, but communications had been spotty. Our main array was completely fried, and the backup system I'd cobbled together dropped signals every few hours. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee and leaned closer to the screen. Something caught my eye, a faint glow in the distance. I adjusted the camera angle and enhanced the image. Two bright beams cut through the murky water about half a kilometer out. "Holy," I whispered, setting down my cup so fast it sloshed over the rim. I grabbed the comm unit. "Mary, you need to see this. Camera 3. Mary's voice came through, tense but controlled. "On my way." I couldn't take my eyes off those lights. After months underwater and 3 days of fighting to keep the station from falling apart, those distant beams felt like sunrise after the longest night of my life. My hands were shaking. We were going to make it. Mary walked in moments later, followed by Stephen and Sheila. They gathered around the monitor. "Is that—" Stephen started. "Rescue sub," I confirmed, pointing at the screen. "Look at the movement pattern. That's not natural current drift." Mary leaned in, her expression tight. "Range?" I checked the telemetry. "About 500 meters and closing slowly. They're being careful." "Thank God," Sheila said, letting out a long breath. Mary straightened up. "All right, we need to—" A harsh alarm cut her off, the sound piercing through the habitat. Red warning lights flashed on the main console. I jumped to the system display and pulled up the alert. "Pod 2, I said, scanning the readings. "Hull integrity dropping, down to 60, 2% and falling. Looks like delayed stress damage from the attack." "Damn it," Mary said. "I thought we had that section stabilized." "We did, but the metal's fatigued. The waste discharge accelerated the corrosion, and now the seismic activity is—" I stopped as another alarm joined the first. "We've got water coming in." Mary took command instantly. "Stephen, stay here and coordinate with the rescue sub when they get in range. Sheila, Cooper, with me to Pod 2. Marcus." Marcus appeared in the doorway, looking startled. "Yes, Commander?" "Grab emergency patch kits and meet us at Pod 2. I followed Mary and Sheila out of the command center, moving as fast as I could through the narrow corridor connecting the pods. The sound of the alarm grew louder as we approached Pod 2, joined by a new sound, the hiss of water under pressure. We reached the sealed bulkhead that separated Pods 3 and 2. Mary hit the access panel and the door slid open. A blast of cold, damp air hit us. The emergency lights cast everything in a red glow, making the scene look like something from a nightmare. Water sprayed from cracks in the wall near the floor, thin jets that caught the light like crystal threads. The deck was already wet, puddles forming and spreading. "The northeast quadrant," I said, pointing to where the worst leaks were concentrated. "That's where the megalodon hit us hardest." Mary nodded. "How bad is it?" I moved closer to examine the cracks, careful not to slip on the wet floor. "The outer hull is giving way. Those microfractures we sealed have reopened and widened." I pressed my palm against the wall beside one of the leaks, feeling the metal vibrate. "The whole panel is under strain." Marcus arrived with 2 emergency patch kits. I grabbed one and snapped it open, pulling out a tube of industrial sealant and a pressure bandage designed for hull breaches. "We need to stop the water first," I said, handing components to Sheila. "Then reinforce the whole section." Sheila and I worked on the worst leak first, a jagged crack about 30 centimeters long that was spraying a steady stream of seawater. I applied the thick sealant gel while Sheila held the edges of the crack together as best she could. The sealant would harden on contact with water, creating a temporary plug. "Hold it steady," I said, pressing the pressure bandage over the sealant. "This needs to set for at least 30 seconds. While we worked on the first leak, Mary's comm unit crackled. "Commander, this is Stephen. The rescue sub is requesting communication. They're about 200 m out now." "Tell them we have a situation," Mary replied. "Hull breach in progress. Ask about their ETA to docking position." I moved to the next leak. This one smaller, but still concerning. The floor was getting wetter, the puddles merging into a shallow pool that covered our boots. "Cooper," Mary said, "what's our time frame here?" I considered the rate of water ingress and the structural readings. "If we can seal these leaks, maybe an hour before we need to evacuate this pod. If we can't, I looked at the steadily spreading water. Maybe 20 minutes before we have to seal the bulkhead and write off pod 2. Mary nodded grimly. Understood. I'll coordinate with the rescue team. You three keep working. She stepped away to speak with Stephen over the comm. Sheila, Marcus, and I continued applying sealant and pressure bandages to the leaks. It was like trying to plug holes in a dam with chewing gum. Effective in the short term, but not a real solution. The main lights flickered, then went out completely, leaving us in the red glow of the emergency system. Power fluctuation, I said, wiping sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. The water must have reached an electrical junction. As if on cue, Mary's voice came through our comms, tense and urgent. Cooper, we just lost external communications. The rescue sub is still approaching, but we can't warn them about the megalodon. My stomach dropped. The main power conduit for the comm array runs through the east wall of pod 2. Must have failed when the water hit it. Can you fix it? Mary asked. I looked at the wall, now with at least 7 visible leaks despite our patching efforts. Water pooled around our ankles. Not quickly, I admitted. I'd need to reroute through secondary systems, and that would take time we don't have. Keep working on the hull breach, Mary ordered. I'll try to find another way to contact them. I turned back to the wall, grabbing more sealant from the kit. A new crack had appeared, longer than the others, water pulsing from it in rhythmic spurts. That one's bad, Sheila said, already moving to help. The standard patches weren't going to work on a crack that size. I dug deeper into my toolkit, pulling out components I might be able to repurpose. I need something rigid to cover this, I muttered, searching through the kit. My fingers found a flat piece of composite material, part of a replacement panel for one of the control consoles, about 15 by 20 centimeters. It would cover most of the crack if I could secure it properly. This might work, I said, showing Sheila. If we seal the edges and then use the pressure bandages to hold it in place. Sheila nodded. Let's try it. I spread a thick layer of sealant around the edges of the composite panel, while Sheila tried to slow the water flow from the crack. When ready, I pressed the panel firmly against the wall, covering the crack. Sheila quickly applied pressure bandages around all 4 edges, securing it in place. Water still seeped from beneath the panel, but the flow had reduced significantly. I released my grip cautiously, ready to press back if the patch failed, but it held. Nice work, Sheila said, giving me a tired smile. I was about to respond when Marcus called from across the pod. Guys, we've got another one starting over here. We hurried over, splashing through water that now reached mid-calf. The new leak was near the ceiling, dripping steadily onto equipment below. I can't reach that, Marcus said, frustration clear in his voice. I looked around and spotted a maintenance stool in the corner. Grab that, I said, pointing. I'll stand on it. As Marcus went for the stool, the main door slid open and Stephen rushed in, looking panicked. The rescue sub is requesting docking clearance, he said, his voice tight. They're less than 50 m out now. Mary appeared behind him. What's our status here? I gestured at the water around us. Not good. We're slowing it down, but not stopping it. And now we've got leaks in the ceiling. Mary processed this quickly. If the rescue sub docks at our main port in Pod 1, they'll be docking to a compromised section. I finished. The structural integrity might not hold during the docking procedure. What about the auxiliary dock in Pod 3? Stephen suggested. I shook my head. That's directly adjacent to where we are now. If Pod 2 goes, it could take Pod 3 with it. Everyone fell silent, the gravity of our situation sinking in. The only sounds were the steady drip of water and the distant alarm. Then it hit me. The maintenance dock in Pod 4. Mary looked at me sharply. That's not rated for personnel transfer. No, but it's rated for equipment transfers, I countered. The hatch is smaller, but people could fit through one at a time. And Pod 4 is our most stable section, farthest from the damage. Mary considered this for a moment, then nodded. It's our best option. Stephen, go back to command and direct the rescue sub to the maintenance dock in Pod 4. Give them the approach coordinates. As Stephen left, Marcus returned with the stool. I climbed up and started working on the ceiling leak, but my mind was racing through the implications of using the maintenance dock. There's a problem, I said, applying sealant to the dripping crack above me. The maintenance dock controls are manual. They're in a junction box near the outer hull of Pod 4. Can you operate them? Mary asked. Yes. but I'll need to go there physically, and with the power fluctuations, we might need to bypass the safety interlocks. Mary made a quick decision. Finish what you can here, then go. Sheila and Marcus will continue with the patches. I worked as fast as I could on the ceiling leak, applying a temporary fix that would buy us some time. When I was satisfied it would hold for at least a few minutes, I climbed down. I'm heading to Pod 4, I told Sheila. You got this? She nodded, already moving to check our earlier patches. Go. I splashed through the rising water toward the door, my boots heavy and wet. Mary followed me out, and we hurried through the corridor toward Pod 4. The junction box is in the maintenance crawl space below the dock itself, I explained as we moved. I'll need to manually override the safety protocols to allow a vessel that size to connect. We reached Pod 4 to find Stephen at the comm station, speaking urgently into the microphone. Rescue submersible Poseidon. This is Triton Station. Adjust your approach to coordinates 472319. Repeat. Adjust to maintenance dock coordinates 472319. He looked up as we entered. They're acknowledging, but they're confused about the change. Tell them our primary dock is compromised, Mary ordered. They need to use the maintenance access, or we can't evacuate. I moved to the far wall of Pod 4, where a small access panel led to the maintenance crawl space. I pulled it open and peered into the dark, cramped space. I'll need a light, I said, turning to Mary. She handed me a flashlight from a nearby emergency kit. How long will this take? I shone the light into the crawl space, assessing the situation. 5 minutes to reach the junction box, another 5 to override the systems, maybe less if everything goes smoothly. Mary nodded. Do it. We'll start prepping for evacuation. I slipped into the crawl space, the metal cold against my hands and knees. As I crawled forward, the beam of my flashlight bounced off pipes and conduits that lined the narrow passage. I moved as quickly as the confined space allowed, aware that every second counted. After about 20 m, I reached a junction where the crawl space widened slightly. Water pooled on the floor, not from new leaks, but seepage from the damage in Pod 2. It was following the slight decline of the habitat's design, flowing toward the lowest point. I continued forward, the water getting deeper as I went. By the time I reached the junction box, I was crawling through several centimeters of cold seawater. The box itself was mounted on the wall of the crawl space, its metal cover gleaming dully in my flashlight beam. I opened my comm channel. Mary, I'm at the junction box. Good. Her voice came back. The rescue sub is approaching the maintenance dock now. They'll be in position in about 3 minutes. I unlatched the cover of the junction box, revealing the complex array of circuits and controls inside. These were the manual overrides for the maintenance dock, designed to be used only in emergencies when the main systems failed. I'm starting the override sequence, I said, flipping the first set of switches. Have them ready their docking mechanism. Water continued to seep into the crawl space, rising slowly but steadily. It was at my ankles now as I knelt before the junction box, working on the controls. Cooper, Mary's voice came through again. Pod 2's integrity is down to 40%. We've evacuated all personnel and sealed the bulkheads. Understood, I replied, focusing on the override sequence. I'm bypassing the size restrictions now. The maintenance dock was designed for equipment transfers, tools, replacement parts, small robots. The rescue submersible was much larger, and the safety protocols would normally prevent docking. I had to trick the system into accepting the larger vessel. I crossed 2 wires, creating a bypass that would disable the size verification. A small spark jumped between the connections, making me flinch. With the water level rising, electrical work was becoming increasingly dangerous. Mary, tell them to initiate docking as soon as they're in position, I said. I've bypassed the size restrictions, but I still need to. My words cut off as I heard a loud groaning sound, the unmistakable noise of metal under extreme stress. A moment later, my comm erupted with voices. Pod 2 bulkhead is showing signs of failure, came Stephen's voice. All personnel, prepare for emergency evacuation, Mary ordered. Priority items only. I worked faster, my fingers flying over the controls in the junction box. The water had reached my calves now, soaking through my uniform pants. I had to finish before it rose to the level of the electrical components. Rescue sub is in position, Stephen reported. Ready to dock. Cooper, status? Mary demanded. Almost there, I said, making the final connections. Just need to activate the docking clamps manually. I reached deeper into the junction box, finding the manual release for the external docking clamps. These would extend from our maintenance dock to secure the rescue sub in place. I turned the release valve clockwise, feeling the resistance as the mechanism engaged. Through the wall of the crawl space, I felt a subtle vibration, the rescue sub making contact with our dock. Now I just needed to secure it. I pulled the docking lever down firmly, and a series of mechanical thuds reverberated through the crawl space as the clamps engaged. The indicator light on the junction box switched from red to green. Docking complete, I reported. The rescue sub is secured to the maintenance dock. Get back here now, Mary replied urgently. Water level in Pod 3 is rising. The bulkhead between Pods 2 and 3 is starting to leak. I closed the junction box and turned to crawl back, but stopped short. The water in the crawl space had risen faster than I'd realized. It now reached halfway up my thighs as I knelt. The way back would be partially flooded. Cooper, Mary's voice had an edge of concern. I'm coming, I said, beginning to move through the rising water. It's getting deep in here. I crawled as fast as I could, pushing through water that grew deeper with every meter. By the time I reached the midpoint of the crawl space, it was up to my waist, making progress slow and difficult. The cold seeped through my clothes, numbing my skin. I kept moving, focusing on the rectangle of light ahead that marked the exit to Pod 4. Behind me, I could hear water continuing to flow into the crawl space, the level still rising. I pushed forward with renewed urgency, the water's weight making each movement a struggle. Finally, I reached the access panel and pulled myself through, tumbling onto the floor of Pod 4 inches, a cascade of water. I was soaked from chest to feet and shivering from the cold. Marcus rushed over to help me up. You okay? Fine, I said, getting to my feet. Is the sub docked securely? Mary nodded from where she stood at the communications panel. Confirmed. They're equalizing pressure now and preparing to open their hatch. I looked around Pod 4, now a hub of frantic activity. Everyone was gathering essential items, research data, medical supplies, personal effects, anything small enough to carry that couldn't be left behind. How much time do we have? I asked, wiping water from my face. Not much, Mary replied grimly. Pod 2's integrity is failing faster than expected. The bulkhead between Pods 2 and 3 is compromised. We have maybe 10 minutes before we need to be on that sub. As if to emphasize her point, the habitat shuddered slightly and the lights flickered. Stephen approached, carrying a waterproof case that likely contained his research data. The rescue team says they can take 12 passengers. There are 7 of us, so we'll all fit with room to spare. I moved to the maintenance dock access point, a circular hatch about 1 meter in diameter. It was designed for passing equipment through, not for people. It would be a tight fit, especially for some of the larger crew members. We'll need to go through one at a time, I said, examining the hatch. And we'll have to remove our packs and pass them separately. Mary nodded. Understood. Sheila, you go first with the medical supplies, then Stephen with the research data. I turned to the nearby storage locker and pulled out some dry clothing. Not a full change, but enough to replace my soaked shirt. As I quickly changed, I glanced at the system's monitor. Pod 2's integrity was now at 32% and falling. Pod 3 was showing signs of stress as well. Cooper, Mary called. I need you to monitor the docking clamps during the transfer. Make sure they hold until everyone's across. On it, I replied, moving to the control panel near the hatch. A metallic clang announced that the rescue sub had opened their side of the connection. A moment later, our hatch unsealed with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The hatch swung open to reveal a rescue team member in a navy blue uniform. Triton Station crew? He asked, looking at our bedraggled group. That's us, Mary confirmed. We have 7 personnel to evacuate. The rescue team member nodded. We can handle that. Pass your essential items through first, then come through one at a time. Sheila approached with her medical kit. The rescue team member took it and passed it back to someone in the sub, then helped Sheila navigate the narrow opening. It was an awkward process. The hatch wasn't designed for this, but she made it through. Stephen went next with his research data, followed by 2 junior technicians whose names I couldn't remember in the stress of the moment. As Marcus prepared to go through, another violent shudder ran through the habitat. Warning lights flashed on the control panel. Bulkhead failure in Pod 3, I reported, reading the alert. Water entering at an increasing rate. Mary looked grim. "Marcus, go. Cooper, you're next." Marcus scrambled through the hatch. I moved to follow but stopped at the control panel. The docking clamp indicators were fluctuating, showing stress from the habitat's movement. "The clamps are under strain," I said. "If the habitat shifts much more, they might disengage." Mary joined me at the panel. "Can you stabilize them?" I studied the readings. "Maybe, but I need to access the manual override again. The electronic controls aren't responding correctly." "How long will that take?" 3 minutes, I estimated. "I need to get back into the crawl space." Mary looked at the hatch where the rescue team member was waiting impatiently. "We don't have 3 minutes, Cooper." Another alarm joined the cacophony already filling the habitat. This one I recognized immediately. The integrity failure alarm for our current section. "Pod 4 is starting to go," I said, pointing to the new warning lights. "We need to leave now." Mary made a quick decision. "You go through. I'll hold the manual override from this side." "No," I argued. "I know the systems better. You go through and I'll follow as soon as I stabilize the connection." Before she could protest further, I moved back to the access panel for the maintenance crawl space. The water was flowing out steadily now, creating a growing puddle on the floor of Pod 4. 2 minutes, I promised. "Just give me 2 minutes." Mary hesitated, then nodded sharply. 2 minutes, then we both leave. Stable connection or not. I dropped to my knees and crawled back into the flooded space. The water was higher now. Reaching my waist as I knelt by the junction box, I reopened it and found the manual stabilizer controls, a series of hydraulic valves that could be adjusted to compensate for movement. Working by feel as much as sight, I turned the valves carefully, watching the pressure gauges respond. The docking clamps needed to maintain a specific pressure. Too much, and they might damage the rescue sub. Too little, and they would disengage. Water continued to rise around me as I worked, now reaching my lower chest. The cold was intense, making my fingers clumsy and slow. I forced myself to focus, adjusting each valve in sequence. Finally, the pressure gauges stabilized in the optimal range. I secured the valves in position and closed the junction box. "Mary," I called through my comm, "the connection is stable. I'm coming back." I turned and began the difficult journey back through the increasingly flooded crawl space. The water was now up to my chest, making movement slow and laborious. I pushed forward, using the pipes along the walls to pull myself along. The water reached up to my shoulders by the time I neared the access panel. I could see Mary waiting, her expression tight with worry. "Hurry," she urged. "The integrity is dropping fast." I gave one final push and pulled myself out of the crawl space. Water cascading onto the floor of Pod 4. The water level in the main compartment was rising too, now ankle-deep and climbing. Mary grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the hatch where the rescue team member was still waiting. "Go," she ordered. "Now." I didn't argue. I ducked through the narrow opening, the metal edge scraping against my back as I squeezed through. Hands from the rescue team grabbed me and pulled me the rest of the way into the submersible. I turned immediately to help Mary, reaching back through the hatch. She was right behind me, passing through with practiced efficiency despite the awkward angle. As soon as she was through, the rescue team member sealed their hatch. "All clear," he shouted to the pilot. "Everyone's aboard." I collapsed onto a bench along the wall of the rescue sub, shivering and dripping. Sheila appeared with a thermal blanket, which she wrapped around my shoulders. "The connection," I said between chattering teeth. "Is it holding?" "We're still attached," the rescue team member confirmed, checking a display. "Preparing for emergency, detach on the captain's order." I looked around at my fellow crew members, all soaked, exhausted, but alive. Mary sat down heavily beside me, her normally perfect uniform as waterlogged as mine. "Good work with the docking," she said quietly. "That was too close." I nodded, too tired to speak further. Through the small viewport near the hatch, I could see water filling the maintenance dock of Pod 4, rising quickly as our habitat continued its slow collapse. The metal groaned around us as another tremor shook the maintenance dock. Water sprayed from a dozen new leaks in Pod 4, the one section we'd thought was secure. I gripped the manual override lever, muscles burning with the effort of keeping it engaged, while the rescue submersible tried to align with our docking collar. "How much longer?" I asked through gritted teeth. The hydraulic system fought against me, threatening to snap back and break the tenuous connection we'd established. The rescue team member on the other side of the partially open hatch Johnson, according to his uniform, shook his head. We can't get a clean seal. Something's warping the docking ring. Cooper, can you stabilize it? Mary asked. I need both hands on this lever, I said, and someone needs to monitor the alignment pins. They're not catching properly. Marcus splashed toward us through ankle-deep water. I can check the pins, he offered, already moving toward the external viewpoint. I adjusted my stance, planting my feet more firmly as water continued to rise around us. The rescue sub's lights illuminated the murky water outside our viewport, creating eerie shadows that danced across Pod 4's interior. Wait, Marcus called out, his voice tight with panic. There's something on the sensors. Mary moved to his console, wiping water from the screen. What is it? Fast movement. Large signature. Marcus looked up, his eyes wide. It's back. My stomach dropped. The megalodon. After all we'd done, after driving it away, it had returned just when rescue was within our grasp. Confirmed, Johnson said, touching his earpiece. Our external cameras have visual. It's circling between our position and your station. Through the viewport, I saw the rescue sub's thrusters pulse, pushing it slightly back from our docking collar. The pressure on the override lever immediately lessened. What are you doing? I called out. Captain's orders, Johnson replied. We can't risk a premature dock with that thing out there. One bump from it could rupture both vessels. Mary slammed her hand against the bulkhead. We're running out of time. This station is falling apart. As if to emphasize her point, another section of ceiling gave way, sending a new cascade of seawater into Pod 4. The emergency lights flickered, threatening to plunge us into darkness. I ran calculations in my head, assessing our dwindling options. We need to drive it away again, I said, like before. The waste discharge? Stephen asked from where he was helping Sheila organize the emergency medical supplies. I nodded. It worked once. It should work again. Mary moved beside me. Can you trigger it from here? I shook my head. I tried accessing it remotely earlier. The automated system is completely offline. The corrosion from the first discharge damaged the control circuits. A loud crack echoed through the pod as a support beam twisted under pressure. The automated system announced in its calm voice, "Warning, hull integrity at 22%. Evacuation recommended." Mary looked at each of us in turn. Options. Now, I released the override lever, letting the docking mechanism reset. There's still waste in tanks 2 and 3. Not much, but maybe enough. I could go back into the maintenance tunnels and manually open the valves. That's suicide, Sheila said. Those tunnels are already flooding. What choice do we have? I countered, already calculating the route in my head. The main controls are fried, but the manual release valves should still work. Mary checked her tablet, which displayed the station schematic. Pod 1 was completely flooded now. Pod 2 was at critical levels, and Pod 3 wasn't far behind. Only Pod 4 was holding, and not for much longer. There's something else we could try, I added, an idea forming. We could detach Pod 1. Detach it? Stephen asked. What good would that do? It's already flooded and structurally compromised, I explained. If we trigger the emergency separation protocols and release the waste simultaneously, it might create enough of a distraction, a diversion, to give the rescue sub clear access. Mary considered this. You're talking about sacrificing a quarter of the station, years of research equipment. Most of it's already ruined by water damage, I pointed out, and I'd rather lose equipment than people. The station shuddered again. A warning light flashed on the environmental console. Oxygen recycling at 60%, Marcus reported. Mary made her decision. Do it. How long will it take? I tried to picture the route through the partially flooded tunnels. 10 minutes to reach the junction, maybe 5 to reconfigure everything. You've got 15 minutes, Mary said. After that, we're out of options. I nodded, already moving toward the maintenance access hatch. Stephen caught my arm. You'll need help, he said. No, I shook my head. The tunnels are too narrow for 2 people to move efficiently. Marcus can guide me from here. I turned to Marcus. I need you to track that thing. Tell me when it moves, where it's going. Marcus nodded, returning to his station. I grabbed a flashlight from the emergency kit and checked my toolkit was secure at my belt. Sheila handed me a small rebreather. In case the air gets thin down there, she said. I took a deep breath and opened the access hatch. Water immediately gushed in, reaching mid-calf before stabilizing. The maintenance tunnel beyond was partially flooded but passable. "Cooper," Mary called. I turned back to face her. "Make it count." I nodded once and dropped into the tunnel, closing the hatch behind me. The space was tight, barely wide enough for my shoulders. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, reflecting off the water that covered the bottom third of the passage. I moved as quickly as I could, splashing forward on hands and knees. "I'm in," I reported through my comm, heading toward Junction 7B. "Copy that," Marcus responded. "The creature is circling approximately 50 miners from your position, making wide loops around the rescue sub and the station." I pushed forward, ignoring the cold water soaking through my uniform. The tunnel took a sharp turn downward, and the water level rose to my chest. I had to half swim, half crawl through the next section. "Hull integrity at 19%. Mary's voice came through the comm. "How close are you?" "Almost at the first junction," I replied, my breath creating small clouds in the increasingly cold air. "I need to cross over to the waste management section." I reached a T intersection and turned right, following the main conduit that connected the pods. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, and I could hear the ominous sounds of metal under stress all around me. "Update on our friend?" I asked. "Still circling," Marcus replied, "but it's getting agitated, moving faster now." I finally reached the waste management junction, a small control hub where manual valves could override the automated systems. Water had reached waist level here, making it difficult to access the lower controls. "I'm at the waste controls," I reported, shining my light on the complex array of valves and pipes. "Going to reconfigure for manual release." I had to submerge myself to reach the main valve, twisting it counterclockwise until it stopped. When I surfaced, I gasped for air, wiping water from my eyes. "Waste system unlocked," I said. "Now for Pod 1 separation." The emergency detachment controls were located on a panel near the ceiling of the junction. I had to stand on a pipe to reach them, balancing precariously in the rising water. "Cooper, we've got a problem." Marcus's voice was tense. "The creature just changed course. It's heading straight for the rescue sub." I worked faster, flipping open the protective cover and inputting the emergency code. "Tell them to pull back if they need to. I'm almost ready." "They can't. They're stuck in position. Some kind of mechanical issue with their thrusters." I cursed under my breath. "How long do they have?" 30 seconds, maybe less." I finished the sequence, my fingers flying over the keypad. "Mary, I'm ready to trigger both systems. Pod 1 separation and waste release, but the timing has to be perfect." "Stand by," Mary replied. "Johnson says their captain wants to try one more docking approach once the creature passes." "We don't have time for that," I argued, watching as water continued to rise in the junction. "That thing is going to hit them." A moment of silence, then Mary's voice, clear and decisive. "Do it now, Cooper." I didn't hesitate. I hit the final confirmation button for Pod 1 separation, then immediately twisted the manual waste release valve to its maximum position. The station lurched violently, nearly throwing me off my feet. "Pod 1 separation initiated," the automated system announced. "Warning, catastrophic structural failure detected." Through the small viewport in the junction, I saw Pod 1 break away, explosive bolts firing in sequence with bright flashes that illuminated the murky water. Simultaneously, jets of dark liquid erupted from ports around the station, the last of our waste material emptying into the ocean. "It's working," Marcus shouted. "The creature's turned away from the rescue sub. It's going after Pod 1. I watched through the viewport as the massive shadow changed course, attracted by both the movement of the detached pod and the cloud of waste. The megalodon charged into the debris field, its enormous body momentarily visible as it tore into the floating remnants of Pod 1. "Cooper, get back here now," Mary ordered. "The rescue sub is moving back into position." I splashed through the rising water, retracing my path through the maintenance tunnels as quickly as I could. The station continued to groan and shift around me, sections of the tunnel beginning to buckle. "Hull integrity at 14%, the automated voice warned. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my lungs and the weight of my waterlogged clothes. When I finally reached the access hatch to Pod 4, I banged on it with my fist. It slid open, and hands reached down to pull me up. "The sub is docked," Stephen told me, as I collapsed onto the floor of Pod 4. "They've got a secure connection." Mary was already at the hatch, overseeing the evacuation. She glanced at me, a brief smile crossing her face. "Good work, now move. You're first through." "No." I shook my head, pushing myself to my feet. "Get the others through. I'll monitor the docking clamps." "Cooper." "I'm fine," I insisted, moving to the control panel. "The connection's still unstable. Someone needs to watch it." Mary hesitated, then nodded. "Sheila, Stephen, Marcus, go." One by one, they climbed through the hatch into the rescue sub. The station shuddered again, more violently than before. "Warning, critical structural failure imminent," the automated system announced. Mary stood beside me at the control panel. "That's everyone. Your turn." I checked the readings one last time. "The clamps are holding. Go ahead. I'm right behind you." She climbed through, and I moved to follow, pausing only to glance at the viewport. In the distance, I could see the dark shape of the megalodon still tearing at the remains of Pod 1. Distracted by our desperate gambit, the metal bench beneath me vibrated as the rescue submersible's engines hummed to life. I wiped salt water from my face, my uniform still soaked from the flooded maintenance tunnels. My muscles ached from the strain of holding that override lever. "Cooper," Johnson called from the front of the sub. "Need your eyes on something." I pushed myself up, my waterlogged boots squeaking against the floor. The rescue sub's interior was cramped but functional, with equipment strapped to every available surface. The rest of our team huddled together on benches along the wall, Stephen clutching his data drives, Sheila organizing her medical supplies, Marcus still shivering under his thermal blanket. "What's wrong?" I asked, moving toward the control station. Johnson pointed at a display. "The docking seal isn't holding properly. We're getting pressure warnings." I leaned over his shoulder, studying the readout. The maintenance dock was never meant for personnel transfer, and the rescue sub was clearly straining against its limitations. "We need to re-secure the connection," I said. "The habitat's shifting is pulling at the clamps." The captain, a stocky man with a salt and pepper beard, glanced back at me. "Can we stabilize it enough to finish the evacuation?" "I can try to reinforce the connection point," I offered. "But we need to hurry. The whole station could go any minute." Mary joined us at the console. "What's the plan?" "I need to get back to the maintenance port and adjust the hydraulic pressure," I explained. "Should buy us enough time to finish the transfer." Mary nodded. "Do it. We still have research data to recover." Johnson handed me a toolkit. "Be quick." I cycled through the airlock back into Pod 4, which was now ankle-deep in water. The station groaned around me like a dying animal. I splashed my way to the maintenance port control panel, prying off the access cover to reveal the hydraulic regulators beneath. The submersible had successfully docked, but the connection was tenuous. I adjusted the pressure valves, increasing the clamping force by 30%. The metal creaked in protest, but the warning lights on the panel switched from red to yellow. "That's better," I muttered to myself, securing the valve positions with locking pins. I tapped my comm. "Connection is stabilized. We've got maybe 20 minutes before the structural integrity fails completely." "Copy that," Mary responded. "The rescue team is helping transfer essentials now." Back through the airlock, I found the rescue sub in organized chaos. 2 rescue team members were helping Stephen and Marcus load sealed containers of research samples and data storage units. Sheila was directing the transfer of medical supplies and biological specimens. "Cooper, we saved your toolkit," Stephen said, pointing to my personal equipment case strapped to the wall. I nodded in thanks, then turned to Mary. "What else needs to come?" "Personal items only," she said. "1 bag per person. The rescue team has already loaded the critical research." I splashed back into Pod 4, making my way to my quarters. Water seeped through the floor seams as I grabbed my duffel bag from under the bunk. I stuffed in my tablet, some clothes, and the small photo of my parents. 6 months of my life in this place, and this was all I could take. A violent shudder ran through the station, and a new alarm joined the cacophony. "Cooper," Mary's voice came through the comm. "The power core is showing instability. We need to initiate shutdown procedures." My stomach dropped. The nuclear power core was designed to automatically shut down in emergencies, but if the automated systems were compromised— "On my way," I replied, abandoning my personal items and sprinting toward the engineering section. The corridor to engineering was partially flooded, the water reaching mid-calf. I waded through, pushing against the current. The engineering bay doors were still operational, sliding open with a hydraulic hiss. The main console glowed with warning indicators. The nuclear core was showing temperature fluctuations due to cooling system failures. If it melted down at this depth, it would cause catastrophic environmental damage to the surrounding ocean ecosystem. I pulled up the manual override procedures on the console. Mary, I'm initiating emergency shutdown protocol Delta 7. Understood. How long? I checked the sequence requirements. 3 minutes to complete. The core has to cool gradually, or we risk a breach. My fingers moved across the console, entering commands and authorization codes. The system acknowledged my inputs, beginning the controlled shutdown sequence. Indicator lights shifted from red to amber as the core's reaction rate decreased. Another violent shake threw me against the console. A pipe burst overhead, spraying water across the engineering bay. I shielded the console with my body, continuing the shutdown procedure despite the chaos around me. Cooper, status? Mary demanded. Almost there, I replied, entering the final sequence. 90 seconds. The lights flickered as auxiliary power kicked in. The core temperature was dropping steadily now, moving into safe parameters. I monitored the readouts, making small adjustments to ensure the shutdown proceeded smoothly. Core is stable, I announced as the final indicators turned green. Power systems are in safe mode, no risk of contamination. Get back here now, Mary ordered. We're the last ones out. I took one last look at the engineering bay, my domain for 6 months, before wading back through the flooded corridor. By the time I reached Pod 4, the water was up to my knees. The rescue sub's airlock was open, with Johnson standing ready to assist. Hurry up, man, this place is coming apart. I climbed through the airlock, dripping water everywhere. Mary was right behind me, the last person to leave the Triton habitat. Everyone's aboard, she confirmed to the captain. Detach immediately. Johnson sealed the airlock as the captain initiated the undocking sequence. A metallic groan echoed through the sub as the clamps released from the maintenance port. I collapsed onto a bench, my clothes soaked and my body trembling from exhaustion and cold. Sheila handed me a thermal blanket, which I wrapped around my shoulders gratefully. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Docking clamps released. Beginning ascent procedures. I moved to a small viewport, pressing my face against the thick glass. The Triton habitat, our home for half a year, was barely visible through the murky water. Its outline was distorted, sections crumpled from the megalodon's attacks and the immense pressure of the deep ocean. As we pulled away, I could see the structure shifting, metal panels buckling inward. There it goes, I whispered, mostly to myself. The submersible's engines powered up, propelling us upward and away from the dying station. Through the viewport, I watched Pod 1, now detached, being circled by the massive shadow of the megalodon. The creature seemed focused on the wreckage, giving us the opportunity to escape. A hand touched my shoulder, and I turned to find Dr. Marcus standing beside me. Despite his haggard appearance, a small smile played on his lips. You know, he said, when I write this up for the scientific journals, I'm going to call our survival tactic the Great Deep Sea Flush. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? The absurdity of his comment hit me all at once. Here we were, having narrowly escaped death by a prehistoric shark, and he was worried about catchy titles for research papers. A laugh bubbled up from my chest, first small, then growing until my shoulders shook with it. Yeah, I managed between fits of laughter. Definitely better than how I saved my team by dumping 6 months of waste into the ocean. Marcus joined in my laughter, and soon Stephen and Sheila did too. Even Mary cracked a smile. We were all punch-drunk with exhaustion and relief, finding humor in the most unlikely places. As our laughter subsided, I turned back to the viewport. The Triton was now just a dark shape below us, growing smaller as we ascended toward the surface. We had faced a creature that shouldn't exist, a monster from Earth's ancient past, and survived using the most unlikely of weapons, our own waste. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the viewport, watching light gradually increase as we rose toward the surface. I knew that I'd never look at waste management systems the same way again.